Okay, let's start. Good evening, good morning, or good evening to everyone, and welcome to the Data-Driven Community virtual meeting. A few words about the Data-Driven Community, as we always present at the beginning of the meeting. This is a screenshot of the website. As you can notice, we are managing two branches of activities. If you scroll down the page, you can see the upcoming event on the right side. On the left side, you can see the second branch of activity we run, which is an annual joint conference called Future Data Driven Summit. You are more than welcome to go register if you haven't done it yet. Don't delay getting your registration completed. I will put all the links in the chat after we will start the session of today. During the session, please feel free to use the chat for questions and for discussions as well. This is not a conference. We are not moving between sessions one after the other. We are more flexible with time. So feel free to use the chat. You are more than welcome to use the reactions as well. I love it a lot. It doesn't interfere with the course of the meeting. If you hear something that you love, like, or you just want to clap hands virtually, then feel free to do so. You are more than welcome to contact any of the community board members if you have any suggestion about the upcoming event or any question. Jan Joseph is the founder and co-administrator of the community. Actually, he's like the leader of the leaders and embodies the spirit and the heart of the activities that we are doing. Anna Weekly is the second co-admin. My name is Ronen Arieli. I'm from Israel. I'm working as a senior consultant in the field of data platform and architecture of enterprise level system. And I'm the third co-admin of the data-driven community. Today, I will be hosting this session. So those are the community board members, and we have Andy with us. Andy, can you share your screen and a few words about yourself?
Yeah, let me share my screen, and then you let me know whether you can see it okay.
We can see your screen. That's great.
Excellent. Right. Let's go then. Well, thanks, Ronan. Yeah, and like Ronan said, this isn't a conference. Let's keep it interactive. I've literally got my session here. I've got my screen here with the chat on it. Yeah, ask questions. Let's.
So you want to steal my job? Usually, I read the question if there are, because speakers cannot follow both of them. That it's better if you can follow it. Just tell me if you want us to check questions for you.
Yeah, check the questions. Like I said, I don't want to keep it like, just one way. But I will, after every slide or two, I'll just have a little glance to my right, and if there's something that I can answer quickly, we'll jump into. And then if not, we can always save it to the end. Right. So, well, thanks for the intro, Ronan, and thank you for, looking after me during this session. So we're going to be looking at Fabric Warehouses, but we're going to be looking at them in the context of using a third-party tool called Dbt. So we're going to go in, we'll touch on a little bit of Fabric, a bit of the warehouse service. We'll go through what Dbt actually is, and well, ultimately why do you want to use it? And we'll see how they work together. And we'll see what works, what doesn't work, because it's important to understand what doesn't work, right? And go in with this with some realistic expectations of what you're going to get out of it when you're using it. And then we'll demo. We'll jump into DBT, we'll jump into Fabric Warehouses, we'll see it working, and we'll see it not working as well. Yeah, some deliberate problems. There is something that I have flagged in the session that didn't work about 3 weeks ago that now works. So we're going to cover that as well. So yeah, a little bit about me. That QR code will take you to my sort of link tree, in which you'll find my blog, which is serverlesssql.com. Mostly blog now around Fabric and the warehouse service. Touch on the Lakehouse a little bit. Did a lot of blogging around Synapse Analytics. And you'll find my YouTube channel. And also at the bottom there, Data Toboggan. So I'm one of the organizers of the biannual Data Toboggan conference. We just had a conference about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we're in the process of getting speaker approval for all the sessions, and they'll be up on the Data Toboggan website. I work as an independent data platform consultant, really specializing in the Azure data platform, but more and more Fabric, right, for that software as a service feel. Yeah, so a big thank you to Ronan, to Jean, to Anna for organizing Cloud Data Driven. And like Ronan said, there's the monthly meetup for Cloud Data Driven, but also the Future Data Driven conference as well that's happening later in the year.
So, 1 second, just to fix you. The Cloud Data Driven User Group meet every week.
Every week, of course it is, Ronan. Yes.
And we have the annual conference, obviously, that you are one of the speakers, so you can speak, you can say some word about this.
Yes, yes. So we've got the conference happening later on in the year, where I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different around the dynamics and Dataverse integration into Fabric. But lots and lots of sessions are going to be in that conference in September, so 25th of September for the Future Data Driven Conference. So in terms of the agenda, yeah, we're going to have a look at the Fabric and the warehouse service itself. Look at DBT. What problem is it trying to solve? Are we just using it for the sake of using it? Why am I particularly interested in using it with the warehouse service? And look at the limitations and the caveats. What do we need to be mindful of when we go into using a tool like DBT? And the reason I say that is because DBT works with a lot of data vendors, not just Microsoft. Yeah, they're going to work with Databricks, with Snowflake. And in fact, one of the great courses, and I'll drop it in to the into the chat at the end of the session, is on Udemy and uses Snowflake. And of course, all these vendors and all these data products have limitations. They have things that the other one does and doesn't do. So you've got to be mindful of that. It's not going to do exactly the same thing on all the different platforms. So let's have a overview of Fabric. And of course, apologies for those that already know what Fabric is, but we've only got one slide. Yeah, so we're just going to cover very quickly what Fabric is. I mean, to me, I describe Fabric as adding significant functionality to a Power BI tenant. Because if anyone remembers Synapse Analytics, what Microsoft did is they created a product for data engineering and data warehousing and brought a little bit of Power BI into Synapse. Didn't really see many people using the Power BI functionality that was available within Synapse. So to my mind, Microsoft have done it the other way around and moved the data engineering and the warehousing into the world of Power BI, that familiar interface that a lot of people use. They've re-engineered, re-architected a lot of the services that are available within there. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're not purchasing individual services and all of the idiosyncrasies that go with the compute in those services, we're buying a single compute. And all these different engines, yes, the engines are different. But the engine that powers the warehouse, the engine that powers real time, and the lake house, they are different, but they all use that unified compute. So it's a lot simpler to approach Fabric from that capacity planning perspective, rather than having to look at all the different services and having to work out what you need from all those services. Now, in terms of control, Fabric's a SaaS product, software as a service. So we have a lot of that control that's been abstracted away. We do have control over Spark. So we can create Spark clusters. We can create and import libraries. Got the flexibility to create environments with different libraries and assign that to the cluster. However, for a lot of the services, we don't really have many configuration options, especially the warehouse. And I'll talk about why that is. And ultimately, Microsoft have gone in on Parquet file format to store data, but also Delta, which is the service in between the compute and the storage to handle the transactions and the isolation levels and the consistency of the data. It obviously brings a lot more functionality to the table as well. Things like time travel. And you'll see over time, Microsoft are going to be adding in a lot of that functionality that you see with Delta into the world of warehousing. So ultimately, firstly, why do we want to use Fabric? So end-to-end data platform solution, right? So on the left-hand side, we've got all our source data. We could have cloud systems, we could have on-premises data stores. We're going to be ingesting that data, loading and extracting that data from all those different sources. We're going to be we're going to be processing that data, cleansing it, enriching it, modeling it, and then we store that data. And ultimately, we use that data for reporting. All those different engines within Fabric can play a role in whatever architecture you want to design for your data platform. If you're only interested in real time, fine. There's a real-time engine there for you that will ingest data from a streaming source, ultimately output that for you to report on. You want to build a standard data warehousing platform, T-SQL store procedures, fine. You've got the warehouse. You're familiar with Python and PySpark, you've got the Lakehouse. And you've got a combination of them as well. A lot of flexibility. So it's really that top end line is the end-to-end data platform solution. Now, when we talk about DBT, I'll revisit this very briefly. Now, in terms of the Fabric Warehouse service itself, so it's a T-SQL based service. So those that are familiar with T-SQL, that have worked with either Synapse Analytics, dedicated SQL pools and serverless SQL pools, Azure SQL databases, SQL managed instances, SQL Server itself, it's T-SQL. And what Microsoft have done is ensured that you can build a warehouse using the T-SQL that you know. But it's software as a service. So it's not even like Azure SQL database or dedicated SQL pool where you've got control over the size of the amount of compute that you're giving. With the warehouse service, that's all taken care. So it could be a little bit disconcerting for some to have that control completely taken away from you. And essentially you are entrusting Microsoft to make sure that that warehouse is delivering the service that you require. There's no maintenance, or it's automatic. It's all behind the scenes. Now, yes, we can dive into statistics on tables. and we can create statistics ourselves and maintain them ourselves. But by and large, the service, the compute, it looks after itself. You give it a workload, a SQL query, it's going to go away, provision the resources that it needs to get that query done. You don't see any of that. But of course, it's not wildly different in the interface, right? We can still create tables, we can create views, store procedures. We've got columns. We're structuring data. This is tabular data that we're structuring. It's strongly typed data. And yes, it does separate compute and storage. And what we mean by that is, I mean, with the warehouse service, it's a little bit more constrained with, let's say, the lakehouse service, but the compute is what they call the Polaris engine that ran serverless SQL pools. And under the hood is Delta and Parquet. And in fact, other services can come along and read that data. So that interoperability of the storage with other services is there to a certain amount in the warehouse. We can't write to warehouse storage, even though it's Delta and Parquet, by another service yet. And yes, so we've covered Parquet, which is that compressed file format. And what Delta gives you is transactions. Like really, the warehouse service, it only has one isolation level, keeps it really simple. I mean, if I had a favorite isolation level, it's going to be the one that's implemented here, which is snapshot, which basically means that readers and writers don't block each other. You can write data to the warehouse while you're reading it, and vice versa. It's very what they call optimistic concurrency. So in terms of the warehouse, lots of questions on the Fabric forum itself and the Reddit, or the subreddit, get my Reddit terminology, I'm pretty new to it, correct, is that there is a Fabric subreddit, which is administrated by Alex Powers. Recommend going on it because a lot of people post questions about, well, what service do I use? Where do I use it here? I'm trying to build an architecture. Where does the lake house sit? Where does the warehouse sit? So from the warehouse perspective, what you're building as a solution with the warehouse is, well, it's a data warehouse. It's an analytical solution. It's not meant for line of business applications. You're not going to be storing data that you're going to go back and update individual rows on a per second basis to run an operational system. This is an analytical and data warehousing service. And it sits towards the business side of things where you start reporting on data. So think of dimensional models, star schemas, facts and dimensions. Your facts are all your measurements. Your dimensions are your labels. They're what bring context to your facts. You can bring other data warehouse modeling methodologies, up to you, but it sits at that right-hand side of the architecture when you start looking at an overall data platform. So obviously I can't talk about Fabric without talking about the medallion architecture. I'm not going to go off-piste and start giving it different names. I'm using the terminology that everyone really uses. And the warehouse is really in that gold zone, the modeled zone. However you want to call that zone that is modeled to deliver your data in a specific way. So it's not containing raw data. It might contain cleansed data, but really that's still sitting outside of the warehouse, to my mind. So DBT. I said I was going to revisit what Fabric was. Now, Fabric puts the infrastructure in place for you. It puts the services in place. What it won't do is write the process for you, is define your process. It's not going to say, oh, right, okay, well, you're going to load this data, so you might want to load this table first, and then this table, and then this table, and oh, I'm going to build a dependency for you, and then I'm going to manage it all. No, I like to think of Fabric as the blank canvas. Yeah, it gives you the ability to come in. You don't have to worry about buying the paper, all the paintbrushes, or the easel. It's set up all there for you, ready to go. DBT is what you can use to define your warehouse process using the DBT functionality and warehouse. And well, how DBT align themselves is they are the transform. So DBT is not expecting you to load source data. So DBT is not for going to Salesforce. It's not for going to Dynamics or file systems or source databases and extracting data. It's for transforming data already loaded into your destination. My destination is a star schema, is modeled data. And essentially it's frameworks. And this is why I'm interested in DBT, because you are essentially building a framework within DBT in how you want to define your downstream data transformations. It's going to take care of the schema, so the physical tables and views themselves. And this is what got me really interested in it, because I'm going to be honest, time and time again, I'm kind of getting a bit tired of having to just define my own metadata. Call me lazy, in which I'm, creating a bunch of metadata that defines my schema downstream. Hey, I just want to define the transformations and let something else take care of that for me. And that's what DBT allows us to do. And what it does is it compiles down to the language for your target platform. So, for example, our target platform today is Fabric Warehouse. So what DBT does is the output are T-SQL statements that are supported, we'll come on to that, by Fabric Warehouse. If you chose Snowflake, if you chose Databricks, it's going to generate the code necessary to run on those platforms. It doesn't do the compute itself. It's really just a compiler. Yeah, so you can run DBT on your local machine, on a container. And what it's going to do is it's going to compile the SQL and run that SQL on your compute, on your target platform. And I guess the terminology for DBT is quite interesting as well, because they call a select query a model. Of course, for years and years and years working with Microsoft tech, a model means something very different. To me, it could be a Power BI semantic model with lots of tables. Except here, a model is one select statement that is producing a result. And that result could end up as a view. It could end up as a table. So a DBT model can comprise of many, 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 or a DBT project can comprise of many, many models. But one of the things that I appreciate most about what DBT does is it's building a dependency. So yes, you're defining your transformations. You're defining, well, this is where I want to get my raw data from. I need to join this data, these tables together, and then I'm going to produce this dimension table. Oh, but I also need to go and get this source data to transform it into this dimension table. Then I've got my facts, so on and so forth. So what DBT will do is it will build that dependency and run everything in relation to that dependency. So just that little diagram here, you can see that, well, my fact table can only run once my dim event table has been created, or my dim product has been created and loaded, and my stage web has been loaded as well. My dim product, well, that can't load until it gets data from the staging products. So from that diagram, on the left-hand side, the source and the products will run concurrently. My load into my web telemetry table, my DIM product and my DIM event will all be running concurrently. And then when all three are finished, dbt can run and load back to web telemetry. So you're building a dependency, or DAG, a direct acyclic graph, to give it its proper name. But yeah, it's dealing with that schema creation downstream and the evolution. Now, with Fabric Warehousing, there are some things that will and won't work in terms of schema evolution that dbt can work with other vendors, which we'll look at. And what's great, it generates documentation as well. So you can add annotations and documentation to your dbt project. You can then generate documentation, and it's visible. It's drillable. You can see what tables depend on other tables, and incredibly useful, especially with the lineage side of things. So this view here now, the lineage is available in both dbt cloud, but also dbt core, which you can run locally. And yeah, so touching on that, the flavors of dbt, and I'm working with both flavors at the moment, which is cloud, but also core. So core, this is where you can just go and get it for free. You can contribute to it as well. Right? There's a great Slack community for dbt. People are working on adapters and connectors to various systems, but you can bring it down, run it on Windows. Yep. Download Python, download dbt, get it integrated into an editor. So I use VS Code. There's plugins. There's a great plugin called Power Tools. And Power Tools, again, it allows you to see lineage, and it shows column lineage as well. Absolutely fantastic. And you can download it via pip. So on the command line, run pip install dbt, build an image, run it in a container. And cloud, well, just as the name suggests, this is the SaaS version of dbt. So you can create your project within dbt cloud, which is essentially a SaaS service. They're the ones that are looking after your dbt project. Now, single developer is free. It'll give you a certain amount of resources that you can use on a monthly basis, and then it's a paid for service, right? Because, well, dbt are looking after everything for you. You can orchestrate your dbt pipelines as well. Thank you, Ronan. And I mean, yeah, this is one of the things that, downloading a command line tool versus a cloud product gives you in that dbt is essentially dbt cloud gives you an IDE, gives you a GUI for exploring and developing. And yep, out of the box, it just plugs in with version control. So you can link it in with GitHub, for example, and then version your dbt project. So what I have been looking at with dbt is integrating it into, yes, a medallion architecture. So ultimately, what I want to do is, yes, I want to use the warehouse as the store of my dimensional data, but I want the data to come from a lakehouse. So I'm not going to dive into getting data into the lakehouse, but for purposes of the session, my lakehouse has my raw data in. I could have my cleansed data in as well. It's got the data that I want to use to populate my dimensional model, my facts and dimensions with. And with the warehouse, yes, I can load from the lakehouse. Now, at the moment, we are constrained with loading from the warehouse using SQL. in that the lakehouse has to be in the same workspace as warehouse, because we're using 3-part naming conventions to query the lakehouse from the warehouse. We can do some clever things if there's a lakehouse in a different workspace. We can use shortcuts to bring that data in. But by and large, you have to have exposed your data in a lakehouse that is local to the warehouse in the same workspace. And essentially what we're doing with DBT, I've got DBT Cloud there, but that could be DBT Core as well, is, well, DBT is loading data from the lakehouse, processing it, and landing it in the warehouse using T-SQL run from the warehouse. So we'll see that in action. Now, all great so far, but like I said, this is going to work, or certain features within DBT are going to work, and some options within those features are not going to work at the moment. Can Fabric PySpark know, but all the job with DBT is capable of doing? Yes, I don't think you can do anything right in PySpark. Right, so there's probably libraries out there to build DAGs of data loading. So yeah, again, you know, you can probably roll your own within PySpark. So the first thing is, in the Fabric documentation, there is something called the T-SQL surface area. And I've always thought that the term surface area was a bit of a funny phrase. It basically tells you what you cannot do in T-SQL. The warehouse service and the engine that it's built from is different to SQL Server. It does not have all of the available T-SQL syntax that you have in SQL Server. SQL Server is now a decades old product. Very, very mature product, brilliant product with lots and lots of features in there. And the Fabric Warehouse simply has a subset of T-SQL. So it doesn't have everything that SQL Server does. So it's important to go in and look, because you might be using something in DBT and getting errors and wondering, well, why am I getting this error? Because this works with another provider. It's probably because some of the T-SQL isn't supported. The whole drop and create strategy, I mean, yes, you could probably use it for a data mart in terms of dropping and recreating dimensions and fact tables. It's the simplest. Yes, the warehouse service works. But of course, having to drop and recreate the tables every single time you're running DBT is probably not the most optimized process. Now, I've got this in red because up until 3 weeks ago, you couldn't actually alter tables within the warehouse. You couldn't alter tables and add new columns. You couldn't amend the schema of a table. Of course, one of the powers of DBT is that's what it's doing. It is allowing you to change the schema downstream by just creating a SQL query that is generating a specific schema. But I'll show you the sort of caveats in how that works. One of the ways in which DBT materializes a select query or a model, because there's a few different ways in which the result of a select query, the result of a model, will be materialized in, let's say, the Fabric Warehouse. It'll either end up as a physical table or a view. One of the methods is what's called the ephemeral materialization, in which it doesn't actually end up as an object in the warehouse at all. It's just a transient SQL query, perhaps to get data from one place to another, without it needing to be persisted in any form of schema definition. It's not supported out of the box. I'll show you why. There's a workaround. I actually posted it on the DBT forum to say, is this an acceptable way of dealing with this? I haven't got an answer yet. You just bear with me for 1 minute.
Okay, I will use this short opportunity just to remind you, please use the chat for question, discussion, whatever you feel that you want to take part in the session. And you can notice that I already post the relevant links regarding the Future Data Driven Summit and community in general. So you can just follow the chat.
Hello, sorry about that. Now, one of the options within DBT is we can synchronize the schema. Yep, so we can define a transformation and it will synchronize the schema downstream to match your definition. However, one of the options, which is called sync all columns, which can generate alter table statements to add new columns, to alter data types, to drop columns that are no longer present in your definition, that's not going to work. If you remove columns or you change data types and you've specified sync all columns, unfortunately downstream, that's not going to work in Fabric Warehouses. And the last thing, I don't mind this, to be quite honest with you. I'm quite interested in what DBT is doing under the hood, but it's quite chatty. It's sending lots of SQL queries because it's sending queries to query metadata and system tables to understand, well, what exists. It's then issuing commands to create tables and create views. So when you're looking at what your model is doing through the logs, you can actually see these SQL statements. We'll have a quick look at that. But like any of these tools that generate SQL, it is good to have a look and find out, well, what exactly is it generating? Because, hey, it could have an impact on the performance of the system. All right, so let's jump into DBT itself. I'm just going to bring up my web browser. Now, I'm not going to go through enabling Fabric or creating a new warehouse, but I have Fabric enabled. Within my Power BI tenancy, I have already created a lakehouse and I have a warehouse. So in my lakehouse, I've got a series of tables. So I've got a table that contains my raw date data. Let's just expand that. I've got some products. Okay. And I've got some web telemetry data. And all this web telemetry data it's just example data, which is showing click statistics on a website. Okay. The data itself, unimportant. Yeah. Use it with whatever data you want. And ultimately, well, what I want to do is I want to build a warehouse. I want to build a set of dimensions and facts to represent that data downstream in the warehouse. Now, at the moment in my warehouse, let me just refresh. Okay, actually, what I'll do is I'm just going to go down and run my cleanup script. Just so you can see we've got no tables that exist in that warehouse at all. And there we go. To be honest, I do love the automated schema refreshing within the warehouse service. But I've got a schema that I've created, dbt underscore data high. No tables, nothing's been materialized at all. And if I go into my DBT model, so this is cloud DBT, you can, well, go to getdbt.com and just now. So get DBT. Try DBT Cloud for free and set yourself up with a developer account. So it's ongoing free developer account. Really good. It's like Databricks' community edition. Absolutely fantastic to get you started. So within DBT, I'm going to develop. And what's great is that if you download something like if you download DBT Core, you integrate it with VS Code, which is very simple. You're just installing a DBT plugin. Essentially, the way that the model is structured in the File Explorer is pretty much how you'll see it in VS Code. It's exactly how you see it in VS Code. So the structure of your DBT project will be the same. Now, what I've done is I have configured a connection to my Fabric Warehouse already. I'm just going to show you that. Right, so I've got a Fabric Warehouse. And there's my server name. Okay, so I've grabbed that from my warehouse. Let's go into the warehouse. I've grabbed that connection string and essentially configured my connection. There's my database, which is my DBT Gold. There are some service principal connections to connect as well, but the DBT Cloud with Fabric Warehouse tutorial on DBT's own website talk you through it. Very simple. So from there, what I can do now is, well, I can start loading my data. Now, because my data is stored in a lakehouse, I've defined a source. So in my, let's say my raw data here, I've got this sources file. So if I open up that, get rid of that. What we're doing is we're essentially, I might just knock this down a little bit. I'm telling DBT, well, I have a source that I want to go and get data from, which is, I'm going to call it my raw lakehouse, but that's the database that you on the compute that you need to go and find the database. As far as I know, it doesn't support connecting to a completely different compute. So the lakehouse is local to the workspace. So when the warehouse is querying the lakehouse, that'll be supported. And I'm just defining my tables. So I've got raw products, raw dates, my raw web telemetry, medium-sized data, and small-sized data. So now I can reference those in DBT to go and get that data. So we have a little look down. I've got my star schema. So there's dim dates. As you can imagine, I'm loading it from that raw dates lakehouse. And I'm just referencing STG dates. And there's STG dates. Yeah. So the model names are what you're going to use to reference. Now, I'm not going to go into this too much because essentially I would just be parroting what the getting started documentation would tell you anyway. I'm more interested in showing you what will and won't work. But if I just drag this up a little bit, what I might do is just lower this down, is the lineage. So if I click on Fact Web Telemetry, that's going to tell me, well, Fact Web Telemetry is loading from, STG Web Telemetry Small. That's coming from my raw lakehouse. I'm not using joins in my Fact Web Telemetry load to go look up dimension keys in demo 1 because I'm using hashing. Demo 2, on the other hand, that's what I am using. So my dependency diagram will show, well, Fact Web Telemetry, yes, it relies on the source data, the source web telemetry data, but I am joining to these two dimension tables to get the surrogate keys. Yeah, so the lineage view, really, really good. And again, if you're using a plugin such as Power Tools for DBT and VS Code, you'll get this lineage view as well. So it's not just exclusive to the cloud version. Click on DIM product. Well, DIM product is loading from STG products, which is getting its data from that raw lakehouse. If I just drag this down, yeah, you can see there's my query. I'm generating a surrogate key, which is a hashing key from STG products. Load downstream. So it's worth having a look at the project file, because what I've done in the project file is I'm going to scroll down, and this part here, by default, any of my SQL statements in any of these models will be materialized as physical tables. However, these staging areas, I don't really care. I don't want them to be materialized as tables. They're just going to be views. Okay? That materialization I'll revisit in a minute. So essentially, I've got a date dimension, a product dimension. I've got a fact table that I want to load. I also have another table, dim event type, which is basically a manual generated table. I could have put it in seed. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that side of things, but essentially my dim event table, I've just hard coded my dimensions. There's only 3 rows because there's only 3 event types, but I've got a last updated. There we go. So I've got a date in my model, and I've defined this model as a snapshot. So in the world of DBT, a snapshot delivers slowly changing dimension performance. Now, I did have a problem with Fabric Warehouses up until a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if anyone's updated the Fabric Warehouse adapter within DBT, but the problem I was having no longer exists. It's working fine. We'll see that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to build my model, or I'm going to run my model. So I'm just going to bring it up here. So I say DBT run, and I'm going to select my raw folder, and it's going to automatically run all of those models within there. But I do want to run my demo. I want to load my date, product, and web telemetry. So I'm just going to specify the top level folder dot demo 01. Just bring it up there. So essentially I'm running 2 models, or sorry, 2 folders with a set of models in. So if we run that, now what DBT is doing is it's compiling the logic within these DBT models, these select statements, into the runnable SQL that will exist on the warehouse. So we've got success. If we go to the warehouse, so let's just jump into the warehouse and look at the tables. Oops. We'll see that we've got our 3 tables, date, product, and fact web telemetry. I'll just click on one. And we've got the data. And well, basically, if I open up so basically, if I open up another table, then see we've got the data there, because DBT is essentially running the SQL on the warehouse service itself. I've got one other table to load in there. I'm just going to get rid of my settings, which is the snapshot table. I'm just going to bring this up there. Now, I've only got one snapshot model. So all I'm going to do is get rid of DBT and just run snapshot. That's going to go, compile that SQL, run it on the destination warehouse, and we should see, if I just expand this, there we go, dim event type. If I open dim event type, right, we've got, yes, I've got my hash, I've got my business key, I've got my descriptive columns, I've got the last updated, which is one of the ways in which I can deal with snapshot tables. And look, anyone familiar with slowly changing dimension metadata within dimension tables is going to recognize the fact that we've got an updated at, and we've got a valid from and a valid to. And this valid from and to is, well, kind of what drives our slowly changing dimensions. If a change is detected, we can retire the old row, bring in the new row. So actually, we'll do that now very quickly. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to change one of the dates here. But imagine that this was in the source data itself. Save that. Run that snapshot again. And now this time, because I've essentially defined this model as a snapshot, it's not removing the destination table, which is kind of what we want, right? It's going to do some checks. It's going to see, well, I've got some last updated. If I have a look back here, what we'll do is we'll come back into the dim event table. And there we go. Right, so we've got 2 rows now for our browse product dimension. Oops. All right, there we go. One of them, and I've just used a date, but of course you'd use a date time, right, for up to the millisecond crossover in terms of the life cycle of a dimension row. But essentially, we've closed off that dimension, and now this is the active dimension row for that particular table. Now, like I said, a few weeks ago, this wasn't working. It was one of those red text things in my session that said, hey, you can't do this, but it's now working. However, let's look at some of the things where some of the behavior might not be what you'd expect it to be from DBT. So if we go back to DBT, what I'll do is I'm going to open this fact web telemetry table. Okay. Now what I've done is I've defined this model or this query as incremental, i.e. append new data as it comes in from the source. And of course, how you then define what it's going to load from the source can be in your SQL query. So it could be whatever logic you've defined to identify what's changed from that source. So what I've done is just a simple, well, check the last date time data that was loaded in this fact table and go and get me the new data. Okay. Whatever logic you need is available. But we've got these if statements within or buried within the SQL itself. Now, this won't appear in the Fabric Warehouse. It won't appear in the SQL that's being run on the warehouse. This is a DBT syntax, and this is Ginger. The very first time the model will run, it will ignore that is incremental, and it'll do a full load of the table. On subsequent runs, because you've told it it's an incremental model, it's going to run this is incremental query. Now, you can override that and run a full refresh if you need to, but ultimately it's going to add that where clause in the generated SQL every time it runs. Now, it's not just the data that may change. It's also the definition of the table as well. And this is going to work with snapshot tables as well, your slowly changing dimension tables. But ultimately, what I've done is I've said, well, look, if the source schema changes at all, add new columns. I think I said this before, sync all columns. The problem is sync all columns isn't going to work with Fabric Warehouses if you remove if you remove columns, or you alter data types of your source data, that's not going to be supported. So let's have a look. So append new columns. So what I'll do is in my warehouse, I'm just going to check the fact table. I think we should just have, 1 day's worth of data, which is the 8th of February. And what I'll do is I'm just going to load in another day's worth of data into my lakehouse. So whatever method I've used to get my data into that lakehouse, I've got my data into the lakehouse here. What's good about these quick Spark Pool startups in Fabric, don't have to wait around too much or too long for a session to be started. So I've done that. I'm going to append the data to my raw table. Take a few seconds. And then we're just going to check to make sure we've got that data in there. Let's command executed. Let's run it. And we should have 2 days worth of data now. But what I am going to do is I'm just going to add another column. Right. So let's just say, I'm going to say another metric column. Right. Now this could obviously come from the source, but in my definition, I'm just going to add this new table, right? Sorry, I'm just going to add this new column. So then when DBT is comparing this with the destination, depending on what I've told DBT to do, it'll perform that action, right? So I've said append new columns. So what that means is I'm just going to run DBT run. I'm just going to select my fact web telemetry model. Let's run that. And actually, if I click on details, you can see all the SQL that it's generating. You can see what it's doing back and forth to understand, because it's querying metadata tables to understand what the schema is of the table downstream. So if we have a look at the fact table now, right, we've got another metric column, right? It's going to be null for the existing data, but it's going to be populated for the new data. But it's not only, hang on a minute, sorry, let me just go back into that query. Run that. So it's added the new table, fine. Oh, actually, yeah. I've had a little bit of latency issues between the lakehouse and the warehouse in terms of when the data is available for querying. But DBT will still run the incremental if it sees something changing from the schema perspective. But let's go back in. And, well, one of the common is to sync all the columns, right? Very useful because I want the definition of my DBT model, my select query, to match that downstream. However, let's get rid of session view seconds. We don't need that anymore. We don't want that in our fact table, right? I'm going to remove that. I'm going to run that model again. Take a few seconds to run. Again, we can look at the detail. See everything it's doing. There you go. Querying metadata tables, dropping temporary views to load data. There's the query itself. It's failed. If we scroll down, we go all the way down to the bottom. Okay. And here, whoops, sorry, on the other way. So here, obviously what DBT wants to do is, well, it wants to do what you've told it to do, which is synchronize the schemas. So I've said, well, I don't need that session view seconds column anymore. Unfortunately, at the moment, Fabric Warehouse only supports altering the table to add a new column. So my append new columns in DBT, that's going to work fine. But I'm not going to be able to drop columns downstream. Okay, so append, so you can ignore. Yeah, so in my incremental model, right, I could choose to ignore any schema changes, which means that it doesn't matter what I'm doing in my select query, my downstream schema is going to stay the same. But I'm using append new columns because that's what's supported in Fabric Warehouse. The last thing that I want to touch on is that problem with the ephemeral materializations, because ephemeral materializations are really, really useful when we just don't need the result of a select query in DBT to be materialized anywhere. We don't need it as a table. We don't need it as a view. So for example, my staging, well, to be honest with you, do they really need to exist as views? They're only useful during the DBT run. So what I can do is I can change that to ephemeral, which means it's just transient. The problem is, we'll see this, is what I will do is I'm going to build, or I'm going to run, sorry, my dim date model, which loads from this source. So my dim date is going to go to my STG dim date, which is going to go to the source. Got a failure. Why? We have a look at the details. Sorry, the details are already in the summary. Go all the way down to the bottom because the error is always at the bottom. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, hang on a minute. Incorrect syntax near the keyword with. Okay, that's a bit strange. Well, this is what DBT is wanting to do on the Fabric Warehouse service. I'll just bring up a query. All right. Now it wraps these create statements in exec statements. So maybe if I just try and remove it, I mean, it won't run, right? But as we can see, what it's doing is create view, dim date, temp view to load the data in, with stage dates as, with final as. Fabric warehousing at the moment doesn't support nested CTEs, doesn't support nested with statements. So if you're finding that you're trying to use ephemeral models in DBT with Fabric warehousing, that's not going to work at the moment. Now, the workaround that I kind of did find is that instead of a with statement, I'm just going to do a select statement. I'm not going to define a with statement. I'm not going to define a CTE within DBT itself. Okay, So now I'm going to run that dim date again, because if you're one step ahead of me, it's going to replace that CTE with just the select statement. We actually have an error here. Let's have a look. From, okay. I've got two froms in there. And let's go and build that again. There we go. DBT run succeeded. So it's a little bit of a workaround where you're not defining a CTE or not defining a with statement within the model in DBT. It's just so that it can insert that select statement into the outer CTE that it's created. Okay, so I think we've come to the end, because I think it's just, a little bit after 6 o'clock there. What I will do is I'm going to drop in the chat. Oh, hang on a minute. Some of the questions. The resource links. Well, yes. So what I will do is I will. I'm at the moment transitioning away from using Twitter into another social media tool. So I'll post it. I'll post it out on Twitter. So what I'll do is Mr. Andy Cutler on Twitter. So I'll post some links. One will be to the DBT Cloud Fabric setup. Another one is going to be to a great Udemy course. I don't usually use Udemy too much, but there is a great DBT course. They use Snowflake, but I've essentially translated all the SQL into Fabric SQL. So I'm probably going to put that on my GitHub repo at some point. I'll put that out on Twitter as well, that you can use. The Slack DBT is also another great one. Yes, Ronan.
We will publish the recording in a few days. Usually we decided to do it on Monday because it's the best day on social media. So I recommend simply to add a comment. This is what we usually do with all the information that you want to give regarding resources.
We'll do that then. Yeah,
I will give you the link when I will publish it. You will be mentioned there, so you will notice. This is the way that we usually do. In addition, there is the YouTube channel that we publish the recording. But regarding social media, just add a comment with any link that you want.
Yes, I will do. But I tell you what I will do is I will drop that Udemy DBT course, because honestly, like I say, I've got no skin in the game with these guys. I'm not getting a cut of the profits or anything. It's just that, it really was a course that I highly valued. And to be honest with you, if you want to get hands-on with Snowflake, that's what they use, a Snowflake. But I forked off their repo because they've got a single page or a single markup page with all of the code throughout the entire course, and I've just been translating it to how it would work on Fabric Warehousing. So that'll probably get done by the time you have the recording up there. So
most of the audience,
one question was
see it recording and not live. All the chat is not in the recording. Just take it into consideration.
Yeah, no problem. So how would you drop a column in Fabric, recreate the table? Yes. If you really didn't want the column to exist in the table anymore, rather than just not populating it, yes, it's a rewrite of the table at the moment. And I tell you why. I've actually I've got a blog on this on serverlesssql.com. Is that Microsoft are now working with the Delta format and Parquet. And the ability to add a column has existed within Delta for several years, But the functionality to remap data types and to drop columns is in specific versions of Delta, which are, I think, minimum reader version 5 and writer version 2, something like that, which supports a feature called column mapping, right? Because if you were to dive into the warehouse Delta logs, you'll see that the columns are just named in the in the log files, just as their column names. They don't have any form of ID. So you can add a column, but you can't change an existing one or drop. But Delta, the version of Delta that works with column mapping, if you look at the Delta log, you can actually see it's now got IDs next to the column names. So the column names have now become the description, and now we've got a proper ID that Delta can reference and drop columns and change columns. So yeah, it's one of these things that you might think, wow, this is a SQL-based service. Why can't it do everything that SQL Server can do? And it's simply because Microsoft are now using different storage technologies, different transaction technologies. So over time, we will see these things being added. I've got no idea. I mean, you need to keep track of the warehouse, the Fabric roadmap, specifically on the warehouse, because I will be interested to know when they will add in column mapping. That's when we'll get full control over the tables, renaming columns, dropping columns, altering the data types of columns. I think that'll all come at the same time when they add in that column mapping. And yes, thanks, Chris. Yeah. Oh, the Slack channel is great. Yeah, I'm in there pretty much every other day, sort of hoovering up bits of information. But yeah, there we go. Like I said, the problem that I really wanted DBT was to solve is all my dependencies of creating dimensions and facts downstream without having to define the metadata up front. I just want to be able to define how, my transformations and let something else deal with all the schema stuff downstream. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Okay, I will share my screen to have a short closure. And thanks a lot. It was great session. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yeah, I can see that fine, yeah.
Awesome. So I will just thank you again for the session. I will remind everyone about the future data-driven, which Andy will be one of the speakers, and there are 59 more speakers. It's a big event. We already scheduled everything, but we didn't publish it, so I will give you some internal information. We have 6 or 5 tracks in parallel. We have about 60 speakers, and it's going to be very long, 11 hours. It's longer than last year because we got a lot more sessions. So just register. You are welcome to follow me, Anna, or Jen, the community leaders on social media. I will publish the recording in a few days, probably. I will publish it anyway. If it's good, probably it will be in a few days. And just see you next week. We have a weekly meeting. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.